Hi everyone. The sermon for this week has been recorded beforehand as I've tested positive for COVID this week. Now, unfortunately, that means I'm not able to be there to present it in person, but on the bright side, a recording means I'm able to spend more time preparing it. So, swings and roundabouts. Now, as my first official sermon as the lay pastor at Geelong Church, I thought it would be a good idea to present my testimony, as I realise that not all of you necessarily know who I am or why I'm even here. But before we get into it, let's open with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for all the people sitting here watching. I pray that you'll help them to receive a blessing from what I say and send your spirit to be with me now as I'm recording this and help the story to touch the hearts and the lives of everybody watching. In your name I pray. Amen. So let's get into it. I'm really excited. One thing I've noticed when I share my testimony, the details, the focuses, and the events that I share will often change depending on the audience that I'm sharing it with. Not that I change the story and that I lie, but just that I try and make it pertinent to the context of the situation. And so as a result, the details that I share will often change from place to place. Which has actually made the preparation for this sermon rather difficult, because for some of you here, it's really not necessary for me to start the story at the beginning of my life, because a lot of you have known me since before I've known myself. Yet, at the same time, I know there are others of you here that may not have even seen me before today, which is awesome and a testament to the growth of the church, I think. But for that reason, I'm going to start at the beginning. I was born into a very loving Adventist home, which is basically the same thing as a very loving Christian home, but with more haystacks. Basically, since day one, I've been taught about and exposed to the teachings of the Adventist Church. I learned a lot from a young age about topics that, to this day, I consider to be relatively deep, and I had a really good grounding in my understanding of the Bible as well as my faith in God. And this is something that I probably took for granted, as we all tend to do when we have something for long enough. You know the saying, you don't miss the water till the well runs dry. It's certainly true and accurate in my case. Have you ever had to go an extended period of time without something that you've always had? Throughout the time that you don't have the thing, you just miss it like crazy and you can think of nothing else the entire time. You can't wait until you have it again. But when you do get it eventually, after just a short time of having it again, you immediately forget about how much you missed it. And if I wanted to keep with the analogy about wells running dry, then the next part of my testimony would probably involve a period of my life when I had a really hard time, I struggled a lot. I'd probably go on a huge sidetrack story about how I couldn't stop partying, drinking, doing drugs. I walked away from God, and nothing in the world could really ever satisfy my needs. And so finally, after a long time away, I returned back, finally realizing my need for God at my lowest ever moment. But see, my life hasn't gone like that. There hasn't been that giant walk away from God or even a key turning point where I realized my need for Him. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had my ups, I've had my downs just like anybody. Periods of time when I've been on fire for God and periods of time when I've been very down. But even in my worst and my lowest moments, I've never actually walked away from God or even denied the foundation that's been in my life for so long now. If you like, my life has always sort of had a well, but it's never run dry. And obviously it's good to never have a dry well because you want your wells to not be dry. That's the whole point of wells. But according to the saying and according to my experience, it's difficult to realize my need for water, or in my case, to realize my desperate need for God, if I've never experienced life without Him, which has been a huge challenge my entire life. How to realize my need for God, and how to make Him the number one priority in my life. C.S. Lewis once said, when he was talking about Christianity, if it's false, then it's of no importance whatsoever. And if it's true, it's of infinite importance. In fact, the one thing Christianity cannot be is moderately important. I want you to just think about that for a second. Think about what he said. If everything that we as a church are saying about God is a lie, then all of this, everything right now, the prayer, the offering, the singing, even this testimony, it's useless. It's not important at all. Or, on the other hand, if everything we're saying and doing is true, then all of a sudden, everything that we're doing right now, this becomes the most important thing in the world. God can never be just moderately important. Either He is real, or He isn't. Yet, in spite of this, I know I have, and I'm sure you have as well, we've all tried to put God into this moderately important category in our lives. Maybe for you, God's actually in that category right now. Maybe God, in amongst all the other things that are happening in the world right now, has just sort of slipped by the wayside, and he's become nothing more than a church visit once a week, or maybe a morning devotion and a prayer if you're fortunate. I know that for me, that moderately important category was exactly where I was. You could say I was the human equivalent of the Laodicean church in the book of Revelation, perhaps even worse, because God was certainly a priority in my life, but he wasn't the priority, if you will. And so this then was a huge lesson that I had to learn, and one that I'm actually still learning, is how to prioritize God and make him the most important thing in my entire life. The Arise program definitely helped me to get just that one step closer to more than just a head knowledge of the facts and the moderately important religion that I'd surrounded myself with, but a life that's completely devoted to being in a loving relationship with God as my only priority, in addition to learning more facts along the way. The big change between me now and the pre-Arise Darcy, as I like to call him, is that I'm no longer content with living with God as just a moderately important figure. I have to be pursuing him as the most important thing in my life every single day. But the journey of getting to this point, it definitely wasn't easy. And even just the story of getting up to the Arise School is a story in itself. For you in the congregation, it might seem, if you've been around long enough, like one day I just took up north and came back 5 months later from a 3-month Bible college program. Don't ask me about what happened in those other 2 months. I'm not legally allowed to talk about it. And then here I am, back again. I mean, in a sense, that's what happened, but there's definitely a lot more to it. Like all good journeys, mine started with a dream. Not a, I have a dream, but a middle of the night kind of dream. And in the dream, some church family that had recently moved up north were showing me and explaining how they went about packing their car for the trip. You know, they had the sorts of clothes they needed to take, the sorts of snacks. Apparently, in my dream, I remember like taking live plants was a huge deal. But of course, it wasn't the specifics that mattered. It was the idea that was important. And in the morning, like I didn't think very much of it. It wasn't like a biblical proportion sort of dream where, you know, like I woke up in sweats and I was like, oh my goodness, this dream is definitely of God. Like it was the sort of dream like I could have easily just woken up and gone, yeah, wow, weird dream, and then moved on with my life completely and forgotten all about it. But I think at this point in my life, like I really needed it. You know, with everything COVID that had happened, not just to me, but to everybody in the world, I really needed a break from life, and I think we could all relate to that. I'd been praying, and actually been praying for the past 6 months leading up to it, for just some sort of leading or plan going forward. Again though, it wasn't like this particular dream was just so intense I immediately praised God for an incredible answer to prayer. All it did was made me talk to one of my friends the next day about the process for getting over the border. He'd recently gone on a trip across, and so I knew that he knew what was going on. Turned out that the borders were open again, they were all good to go. But again, it wasn't like I was super excited at this news, because there was no plan to do anything yet. All that conversation did was made me think about it a little bit more, and consider the possibility, which was a slim one at best. Remember, at this point in my life, I had absolutely no income, so long holiday up north, probably not the best idea. I actually don't know why I pursued it at all. With that information, realistically, I should have just forgotten about the whole thing. But in my mind, it was just going to be such a good opportunity to reset mentally and to take a break for a little while, try and find my feet again when I come back. After I got that information from my friend, I decided to go home and have a chat about it with my parents, but not present it as an idea that this was something I was probably planning on doing, but just more of a, hey, what would you think if I did this? Because the idea at this point hadn't actually properly formulated. And then, when I got home, my dad wanted to speak with me. And that isn't particularly unusual, I just want to let you know, like, we do actually speak quite often, but on this occasion, he had something in particular that he wanted to say to me. Turns out he had just that day received a phone call from the same people in my dream that had moved up north, and they'd just been made aware of a job opportunity. And, you know, being aware of my situation, they were just casually inquiring as to whether or not it would be something I was interested in. I really don't think they expected me to be as, like, instantly on board with the whole idea as I was. But after I'd explained what had happened in the dream, both my dad and I thought it was something that was definitely worth pursuing. I basically started packing that very night. There were definitely a few things that I needed to do before I left. I couldn't just take off, especially as I didn't know how long I was going to be away for, what I was going to be doing when I was up there, or even if I would ever be coming back. But I've always thought in my mind that if God ever led me in a particular direction, and I knew for a fact that it was God, then I would definitely just run that way, no questions asked. And I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to prove that, because I think I did. Because of that, I only had a few days to actually say goodbye to everyone. The job itself wasn't guaranteed, and so in order to avoid unnecessary pressure and shame if I didn't get the job, I didn't actually tell anybody that I was going. In case I'm back in a few weeks, you know, tail between my legs, no job in hand, so, you know, If you weren't aware that I was going or didn't know that I had gone, or perhaps you didn't even know that I'd been anywhere, then don't worry. Like, I can promise you weren't deliberately left out, because no one else knew either. Less than 1 week after the initial dream, I'd packed my bags and left. It was Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock to be exact. A short 20-hour drive later, I arrived at the Queensland border. I didn't actually end up having any sleep breaks along the way, so I ended up arriving on Thursday morning at about 3 a.m. The interview itself wasn't scheduled until some point the following week, just to give me a bit of time to settle in. So I started to help out on the farm where I was staying, earning a bit of my keep before I could actually start paying rent. And amongst the various jobs, there was an errand that we needed to run. It was just picking up a trailer from someone's house. It wasn't anything special, except that the owner of the house was just convinced that I was there for a reason. He ended up asking me, or rather, he told me, "You must be here to attend the Arise program." To which I said, "What is the Arise program?" After a brief explanation to me of what it was, I said, "Yep, I'm definitely not here to attend the Arise program." To which he said, "You should definitely consider doing the Arise program." That was on the Friday morning. It was just his confidence and his eagerness to see me do the program that sparked some curiosity inside me. I can't just say no to doing this supposedly amazing program if I don't even know what it's about. So I spent that evening just learning as much as I could about it and praying to God for some guidance. It turned out the Arise program was this 3-month Bible college course with a real focus on discipleship. It definitely wasn't something that I felt led to do, but the people around me shared the same enthusiasm as the guy with the trailer, and apparently it was going to change my life and you won't regret it. But even if I wanted to do it, there's still going to be issues. The program's relatively expensive, and especially for someone like me who at that point did not have a job. I mean, yeah, it's convenient that I was already up there. I wouldn't have to pay extra for transport, but the tuition fees alone were just way out of my price range at the time. Another issue is that they probably wouldn't even take me. They open applications for the program months in advance because they get such a large number of people applying. And of those people that actually do apply, only a small percentage of that will actually be able to attend. This program started in 2 days. But I thought, hang on, this actually plays into my favor really well. It's a win-win situation. I can do my best to apply for the program, and if God somehow manages to pay my fee, find me a spot, then clearly God wants me to do the program. But that's never going to happen, so I can just apply, say I tried my best, and then move on with my life when I ultimately get rejected. So we prayed a lot on Friday. If God could find a place for me in the program and the money required to attend, then I would do the program and I would give it 100%. As a result of that, on the Saturday, I had a brave conversation with the coordinator for that year. I say brave because I don't normally go up and talk to strangers, because I don't usually do that too well. But of course, the answer from him was no. The spots had all filled and the program started so soon. I wasn't upset at all because I expected that this was going to be the case, but the coordinator was sympathetic to my situation. And so he's just I'll just grab your phone number in case anything changes. At this point, you can probably see where this is going more than I could at the time. Because on the Sunday, I was very surprised to get a phone call saying that a spot had actually opened up in the program, and if I could get to the sign-in place in 2 hours, the spot was mine. As you can imagine, I was completely floored. No sooner had I arrived there than I packed up again and moved. This time from this peaceful farmhouse to a share house in the middle of the city with 9 other guys who were also doing the program. My head for the next 3 weeks, I reckon, was just completely spinning. It was just a few hours ago, it seemed, I was chilling at home, then moved up to get a job, then cancelled the job to do a Bible boot camp for the next 3 months of my life. I think my parents took the news about as well as they possibly could have with what little information I actually had, because I didn't actually know that much about the program. They're all like, "So, who are you going to be staying with?" And I'm like, I don't know. In fact, I don't even know where I'm going to be living. In the initial stages of the program, there was a real focus on ice-breaking and getting to know all the other students. But my head's still spinning. I remember that there was no way I would ever be able to remember the names of all the other 32 students. They all sounded so similar to each other, and I could never hear the name properly the first time. Yet I'm supposed to spend all my time with these people. Like I said, my head absolutely spinning. And yet, over the course of the 3 months, every single one of those names became more than just a name to remember. They weren't even just fellow students, but they were genuine friends and family. We were all going through this spiritual revival and shaking in our own individual lives. And not only that, but there were challenging events at the time that brought us all closer. Things like COVID, the rains, the floods, or the adversity during outreach. Those hard moments allowed for the fun times to be just that much more fun. To the point where not only can I tell you the names of every single person, which I never thought would be possible, but their dreams, what drives them, where they came from. I can sit here now and say honestly that I prayed for 6 months for God to lead me somewhere, and He did. It wasn't immediate like I expected, and it wasn't always obvious or easy. But in the end, not only did I learn more about God, make a new family, and have a blast, but I transitioned from my state of having God as this moderately important religious figure in my life to a place where I needed God to be the most important thing in my life. God is now the priority. Now, I understand if you can't necessarily relate to my story. Maybe you're in a situation right now where it feels like God hasn't come through for you and isn't listening to your prayers. You might feel abandoned or ignored and desperate for any sort of answer. I can definitely relate to that, as that was my situation not more than a year ago. I even used to get frustrated at testimonies like this, where you would have people who would share stories of God working in their lives, and it seemed like God was just working with everybody but me. All of these incredible testimonies of people who moved countries or visited friends on an impulse just in time to help them, or God leading them to a witnessing opportunity that started a brand new faith journey. Like, don't get me wrong, all these stories are great, and so are the people that tell them. But my frustration came because I knew that God was capable of working in people's lives like that. So why wasn't He working in mine? If God could, why wasn't He? Now, obviously, eventually something like that did happen to me, and it took a really long time, like at least 6 months of prayer. And you can probably throw in at least 18 years on top of that, of me not knowing what direction my life was supposed to take, despite constantly asking for that leading. And then, even once I started making bigger strides towards the goal, it wasn't immediately obvious to me that that's what I was doing. I didn't know that I was there to attend a rise until a few hours before the program started. It wasn't like I moved up to New South Wales with the intention of studying there. Yet, there's no doubt in my mind now that that's exactly why God moved me up there. So maybe if you're sitting there thinking exactly what I probably would have thought 12 months ago, like, oh yeah, here we go, another story about how God's working for other people but not for me, then my counsel to you is to just be patient. You see, God doesn't call when it's convenient for you. He doesn't work on our timeline. Maybe the reason God hasn't called you yet is because the thing that He's going to call you to do isn't ready for you yet. In my story, I started praying for God's leading years before, and especially hard the 6 months before the program started. But if God had answered my prayer in the way I expected at that point and told me to move up north when I started praying, I wouldn't have actually been able to attend the rise because it hadn't started yet. If I'd moved earlier, I probably would have gone up there, gotten a job, and then made it that much harder on myself in the long run. I might not have even done a rise at all. And so, while I can sit here now and say with absolute certainty that God answered my prayer from the beginning, I definitely felt ignored at the time, because God's plan took a long time to set up. Yet, from our limited perspective, God doesn't take time to set things up. He either answers prayers or He doesn't. Whereas in reality, there are 3 answers to prayer, and God always gives them immediately after we ask. There's the yes answer, which is probably the one that we recognize and accept the most because it's what we want to hear. There's the no answer, which is probably the hardest to accept. But the third option, which was my situation, is also challenging, because sometimes the answer isn't yes, sometimes the answer isn't no, sometimes the answer is to wait. And waiting is really hard, especially when we want an answer straight away, or we can't see the things that God's doing to settle up behind the scenes. And so maybe that's your situation today. And my question for you is, what things are you waiting for to happen in your life? Maybe you've been praying the same prayer for just what seems like the longest time. Maybe it's even longer than 6 months. And it just seems like God isn't providing any sort of direction or answer. Or even like God isn't listening to you at all. But I can promise you today that God is listening. It's just that often the answer of no, or even the answer of wait, is hard for us to accept. So my challenge for you today, and what I hope you can get out of my story, is that God always answers prayer. It's just not always in the way or the time that we expect. And so the best thing that we can do right now is to just be ready for whatever happens. And when you are ready, I can honestly say that good things will happen. Like, I can sit here now and say that my life is much better now as a direct result of God's leading in my life. I'm not going to quote Jeremiah 29:11 out of context, but I will say that God's plans are amazing. I mean, for me, I got to make some incredible memories, meet some amazing people that I now get to know for an eternity. And so, in closing, I want to say that God always wants to work in your life, if you'll let Him. And if it feels like He isn't, and you find that frustrating, just like I did, then do your best to be patient, because it will come eventually. Focus on being as prepared as you can for when He does call. Because when God called me, it changed my life in such an amazing way. God for me now is the priority.